You stand at the edge of Rome's imperial palace, where marble halls mask shadows thick with fear and power. It is the mid-60s CE, an era when the city of Rome thrums with luxury and dread in equal measure, and at its center sits Emperor Nero, the young Caesar who, in his cruelty and excess, has become almost a legend even among his own terrified subjects. Inside these gold-veined corridors, hundreds of lives orbit the whims of one man. Senators tread softly, free citizens mutter in corners, and the complex machinery of empire is lubricated by anxiety as much as coin. Somewhere among the anonymous servants and enslaved children, a boy called Sporus passes unnoticed, for now. His origins are shrouded in obscurity. The chroniclers do not record his parents' names nor even his birth. His identity flickers only when catastrophe draws him into the open. In the Rome of Nero, anonymity is often protection, yet sometimes fate is not to be denied. On warm Roman nights, wine flows and laughter bubbles up in imperial banquets, but this joy is brittle, haunted by the awareness that the emperor's mood can darken at a whim. Nero, once guided by the philosopher Seneca, has abandoned reason for theatrics and blood. The recent murder of his mother, Agrippina, by his own order, hangs in the air like incense. Whispered conspiracies grow louder. Purges rip through the senators' ranks. It is in this world of spectacle and suspicion that the story of Sporus will violently unfold. The imperial palace, Domus Aurea, gleams atop the city's heart, built at vast public expense even as the people grumble in ever louder tones. Its sprawling gardens and fantastical rooms are the stage upon which the drama of Rome's collapse plays out. Yet, for many, it is less a wonder than a warning. The architectural embodiment of a ruler untethered from the lives of ordinary men and women. You watch as Nero broods, alternately fragile and ferocious, his mind lurching from performance to purges. Historians have long debated the forces that drove him. Was it madness? Was it the suffocating pressure of absolute power? Or was Nero, after all, merely the ultimate expression of a Rome grown sick on its own abundance and ambition? Did the city breed monsters, or merely reveal them? From the vantage point of the powerless, the palace is less a seat of glory than a gilded trap. For the enslaved and low-born, survival depends on invisibility and luck, but sometimes, as with Sporus, misfortune arrives in the glance of a powerful patron. One's very features, a slight build, a resemblance to another, can become a curse. Perhaps somewhere in the warren of servants' quarters and back halls, a rumor already circulates. The emperor is searching for something, or rather, for someone. This is not merely the story of Sporus. It is the story of a city vibrating on the edge of an abyss, where proximity to power brings both privilege and doom. The smell of incense might blend with fear in the night corridors. The click of sandals might send a shiver down a spine somewhere in the shadows. Psychological survival, in a court like this, demands a kind of dissociation, a skill to appear useful, pleasant, unthreatening, all while never showing fear. Here, historians agree, and yet disagree. Did the slaves and freedmen adapt, manipulating the system for slim advantage? Or did they simply endure, clinging to anonymity as best they could? As the year nears its grim climax, the machinery of fate moves silently in the background, and the boy named Sporus is about to step, unwillingly, into Rome's central nightmare. The emperor is restless, the city holds its breath, and within the palace walls, the difference between victim, accomplice, and spectacle is about to blur forever. You shift your gaze from gilded chambers to the narrow, shadowed alleys of Rome, seeking out the shape of Sporus before his world upends. Precious little is known of his childhood, so little, in fact, that it is his very lack of recorded origins that defines him. Was he born within the imperial household, the child of another slave? Did he come from one of the conquered provinces, plucked from chaos and brought here as human loot, a boy of Greek, Eastern, or Italian descent? The absence of answers is itself part of the cruelty, history's indifference to the small and powerless. Imagine Sporus as a boy, perhaps 10 or 12, perhaps slightly older, adolescent yet still slight, as ancient descriptions hint at his delicacy of build and unbroken voice. Daily life for a palace slave is a choreography of anxiety and anticipation. You see him darting through steamy kitchens heavy with the scent of roasting meats and baked bread. His hands are quick, his ears sharper still, attuned to footsteps that signal danger or opportunity. To exist in the emperor's shadow is to be constantly alert, to guess at moods, to sense shifting alliances, to vanish when the wrong eyes are searching. For the children like Sporus, identity is malleable. They assume whatever role is required, page, cupbearer, messenger, while learning never to draw unnecessary attention. The psychological toll is considerable. Survival depends on anticipating desires, reading faces, suppressing any selfhood that doesn't serve. The palace, while dazzling, is also a petri dish for fear and suppressed trauma. Some boys disappear overnight, victims of a master's displeasure, an accusation whispered, or simply the random churn of imperial politics. What else might we infer about Sporus before Nero singles him out? Historians still debate whether he had already caught the emperor's eye, perhaps chosen for his resemblance to Nero's deceased wife, Poppaea Sabina. Did the boy understand before the rest that his unusual beauty was dangerous currency? Or did he, like so many so-called palace pets, labor under the delusion that his skillful service would guarantee his safety, or at least his invisibility? A lesser-known detail lingers in some ancient sources. By this time, Nero's circle has become a gray zone in which boundaries between gender, decorum, and power blur. Musicians, actors, and slaves mingle, their fates yoked to the emperor's passing fascinations. Sexual exploitation is normalized, though never spoken of openly. In such an unnerving environment, a youth like Sporus has little recourse but to hope that fate passes him by. Yet the imperial gaze always hungers for novelty. Nero's grief at the loss of Poppaea Sabina is a fever that has not broken. He grieves loudly, yet also seeks to fill the void at any cost. Some sources propose that he sought in Sporus a living effigy, a replacement for his lost wife. Not for love, but for sick spectacle, to command the universe back into harmony through grotesque mimicry. Did Sporus see this coming? Did anyone warn him? Even now, scholars argue over his inner life. Was Sporus fully aware of the gears turning around him? Could he have known what it meant to be selected, and not for elevation, but for erasure and reinvention at another's whim? Does he sense, in the tightening glances from Nero and his attendants, that the machinery of danger has begun its slow, inescapable creep? It is the hours before the storm, the final moments when Sporus is only a servant, no more remarkable than any other. But Rome in Nero's final years is a place where peace is only a mask, and the emperor's fantasy, when it lands, can upend a life with seismic force. You feel it, a tide rising, the hush before history's roar. Dawn breaks, casting pale light upon the palace, and a chill wind stirs the curtains of Nero's private chamber. On this morning, Sporus's life is to be shattered. The emperor's obsession, born of mourning and shaped by a mind twisted between theatrics and tyranny, has reached its climax. Somewhere deep within the palace, quiet preparations are underway, cloaked in early-hour secrecy. You might imagine the scene unfolding at the outer edge of audibility. Muffled voices, nervous laughter, the scrape of a metal instrument against stone. Sporus, perhaps, is summoned and led, his fate concealed from him until the very last possible moment. Contemporary sources skirt the clinical brutality of what occurs. He is forcibly castrated by imperial order, transformed in flesh to serve Nero's escalating fantasy. The imperial household, already a theater of misery for many, becomes a stage for this most irreversible of violent acts. Historians still debate why Nero demanded the castration of Sporus. Some say it was madness pure and simple, the act of a grieving husband seeking to recreate his lost Poppaea in a living simulacrum. Others point to Roman traditions. Though rare, eunuchs sometimes served powerful roles in the East, and Rome itself was not wholly unfamiliar with the concept, however repulsed it professed to be. Was it a calculated move by Nero to arrogate the exotic and the shocking, flaunting his rejection of Roman norms, or simply grief weaponized into dominance and suffering? Once the act is complete, there is no turning back for Sporus. The world shrinks suddenly to a steel-bright point of pain and fear. Physical agony merges with a new, cold understanding. He is no longer simply a boy, a servant, or even a person in any recognizable Roman sense. He has become something else, an emblem, a living experiment, a projection screen for the emperor's unmet desires. In this moment, Sporus's own will is beside the point. Survival is reduced to a raw, animal instinct. Strikingly, the the psychological ramifications are as severe as the physical ones. Ancient Rome, for all its brutality and spectacle, had rigid categories for gender and status. Eunuchs were neither male nor female in the Roman imagination, hovering in a liminal, often reviled space. Unlike in the imperial courts of Parthia or Byzantium, where eunuchs could become powerful, here in Rome, such a status marked one as both less and other, useful but never honored. Sporus's identity, already fragile, is now obliterated and reborn at the emperor's pleasure. What did this mean for the mind of a youth whose life had depended on blending in, anticipating needs, seeking safety in routine and invisibility? Overnight, Sporus is made hyper-visible, his difference now a source of imperial fascination. The attention of Rome's most dangerous man is now inescapable. His looks, his manner, even his silences are scrutinized. There is a peculiar cruelty in this, to be made unique not by achievement, but by a wound. The historical record yields only hints at Sporus's state of mind. Some speculate, quietly, cautiously, that he may have dissociated, retreating into numbness as so many traumatized people do. Others suggest he may have tried to cultivate what little agency remained, using wit or beauty as a shield. Yet for all the conjecture, the reality remains. From this day, Sporus's body is no longer his own. He is made to represent a ghost, a lost empress brought back by imperial decree. Even now, historians quarrel about the details. Was the operation performed by a skilled hand, or was it a hurried, botched affair? Did anyone protest? Was there a point when Sporus was offered a choice, or was the entire court too terrified to intercede for him, knowing the cost of compassion under Nero? You stand quietly, imagining the echo of footsteps in a palace corridor, the muffled sound of weeping, the world closing in. The machinery of Nero's will has made Sporus into an object, yet paradoxically, the story of Sporus does not end here. It has only begun in trauma and transformation, under the gaze of an emperor who cannot stop himself from staging tragedy as theater. The fever dream of Nero knows no boundaries. Rome, already bracing from the spectacle of Sporus's castration, now faces an even more bewildering act: the marriage of this newly made eunuch to the emperor himself. You watch as an invitation spreads through the upper echelons of the imperial court, not a request, but a summons none dare ignore, pulling nobles, senators, and high-ranking servants toward a ceremony that will unmoor the last vestiges of tradition and taste. The day dawns with a hush of anticipation. In golden halls draped with the richest fabrics, the splendor rings hollow. The guests, costumed in formal toga and palla, assemble with forced smiles, eyes flickering with calculation and shock. Nero, ever the performer, preens in anticipation, arranging every detail to mirror the banquets and rituals of a legitimate Roman wedding. Musicians tune their lyres, scented oil smokes on the marble altars. At the center of it all, Sporus, garlanded in veils of purple and gold, is presented as the bride, his face glazed with a composure too brittle to last. The emperor leads Sporus by the hand before Rome's elite, speaks his vows, and showers him with jewels fine enough for a queen. In place of the traditional bride's veil, the flammeum, there is a shimmering replacement, carefully arranged to echo the memory of Poppaea Sabina. Even the rituals of Roman wedding law are mocked, twisted into tools of self-indulgence and grief. Some present stifle laughter, others choke on horror or anger. At one point, Nero mimics a groom's solemn promise, pressing a ring to Sporus's finger as if binding him to the dead, not the living. This moment, bizarre and deeply public, is recorded by multiple ancient sources, yet almost always with a sense of disbelief. Historians still debate the meaning behind it. Was Nero truly so detached from sanity, so enthralled by his loss, that he believed Sporus could fill the emptiness left by Poppaea? Or was the emperor engaged in a monstrous satire, using Sporus to taunt his critics, demonstrating that there were no limits to his power, or his contempt for Roman values? Some even suggest that, for a flickering instant, Sporus himself may have been elevated, his suffering temporarily reframed as imperial privilege. Even then, it was privilege purchased at the cost of selfhood. For Sporus, psychological reality is a hall of mirrors. He must learn almost overnight the art of masquerade. Every gesture is now performance. The veiled downward glance, the fragile stance beside the emperor. He is wife, queen, and court diversion all in one. A role that requires him to efface his pain, to become a stage upon which Nero enacts his appetites and agonies. There is no safe place to rest inside this costume of forced womanhood. The friction between public spectacle and private terror is relentless. What did Sporus feel as the guests feigned celebration? Was he paralyzed by fear, or did he retreat inward, away from the cacophony of forced joy? The Roman audience, for their part, are not fooled. Many see through the theater, sensing not audacity, but desperation and cruelty. The marriage, if it can be called that, becomes an open secret throughout the city, a symptom not only of Nero's madness, but also of the danger everyone faces when power slips its leash. Notably, some ancient writers speculate that Sporus begged for his life during the ceremony, while others suggest he wore his role with eerie composure, finding a strange strength in survival. The truth perhaps lies in between, his outward calm masking a storm of dread, loss, and shamed endurance. The wedding is finished, the vows are spoken, and a ripple of unease passes through Rome. But for Sporus, the true ordeal is only just beginning. He is chained not by iron, but by the relentless attention and impossible demands of a city gone mad, and a man who refuses to let his ghosts rest. Now, as the echo of ceremonial laughter ebbs, Sporus moves through the palace cloaked in new peril, the title of Empress. You watch him glide along floors slick with wax, cloistered between the marble pillars, each step a silent negotiation with fate. The court's gaze sharpens, dissecting him as spectacle, as symbol, as the living echo of Poppaea Sabina. Sporus must perform femininity not by choice, but by the iron force of imperial command. Days begin and end in forced ritual. Sporus is dressed in imperial finery, silks that glide unnaturally against his skin, heavy with gold and perfume. His hair is styled, his face powdered, his demeanor policed relentlessly by attendants whose own safety depends on his perfect compliance. Every public gathering becomes a command performance. At Nero's side, Sporus smiles. His porcelain composure both reassures and disturbs onlookers. No gesture escapes judgment, the angle of his neck, the flutter of his hands, his punctual responses when Nero calls him Sabina. Beneath this outward calm lies a private terror. Ancient sources fall silent on Sporus's inner monologue, yet you can imagine the psychological whiplash as he is forced to erase himself and to live as an elegy. It is a constant rehearsal, and every stumble or falter is noted. To be too sad is to risk the emperor's wrath. To appear content may incite envy or suspicion among scheming courtiers. There is nowhere safe, nowhere wholly his own. The palace is vast, but Sporus's world is a tight circle drawn by survival. One significant historical fact emerges during this period. Nero parades Sporus publicly, at games, in the theater, at banquets, addressing him as my wife before the Senate and the people. By imperial decree, the fiction becomes law, and all Rome is called to observe. The city, both scandalized and enthralled, cannot look away. Foreign embassies whisper the news back to their monarchs, their reports tinged with incredulity and pity. The risk is not just for Sporus now. Rome's stability itself seems imperiled, its customs unmoored by the whims of a king who would marry a eunuch boy while his enemies gather in the shadows. Historians argue over the meaning of Sporus's new role. Was he the ultimate victim, a mute canvas for Nero's loss? Or is there agency, however faint, in Sporus's compliance, a nimble survival tactic enabled by outward acquiescence? Some suggest the court knew far less than it claimed, that Sporus, trained by years of silent observation, learned how to anticipate not just Nero's desires but those of the wider court, building fragile alliances and avoiding the snares of gossip. Others, more cynical, doubt Sporus had any room to maneuver at all. One rarely noted insight into Sporus's existence comes from the reactions of others at court. For some, his suffering is entertainment, a distraction from their own peril, and an object lesson in the emperor's omnipotence. Others perceive the deeper horror. In Roman society, there was little distinction between shame inflicted on one individual and a broader warning to all. By breaking Sporus so publicly, Nero sends a message. If even the bride is not immune, then no one is. The threat is ever present. Paranoia thickens the palace air as conspiracies churn beyond the walls. Sporus, woven into Nero's elaborate performances, must endure constant shifts between desired object and scapegoat, shielded only by the emperor's waning interest. Did he find solace in the brief routines of daily life? A cup of wine here, a soft word from a servant ally there? Or did dread hollow out each moment, the strain of living as an effigy driving him deeper inside himself? Again, the details blur. There are moments when Sporus disappears from the record, the silence itself suggesting exhaustion or silent rebellion, perhaps a calculated illness, or just the invisibility learned through trauma. Whatever his inner landscape, he endures, not as wife, not as man, not as free being, but as living testament to both the cost and perversity of unchecked power. The world outside the palace darkens, and with Nero's paranoia metastasizing, even this fragile equilibrium cannot last. Time stutters and then lurches forward. Rome is burning, in spirit if not in fact, and the palace Sporus has haunted as empress becomes less a home than a labyrinth of escape routes. You sense the air shifting, tense with the rumors of rebellion and desertion. Nero's enemies, long cowed by his unpredictable savagery, finally surge in open revolt. The Senate, the Praetorian Guard, the generals abroad, all sense the old world crumbling. One day, as dawn edges above the Palatine, news travels through hushed corridors. Nero is on the run. For Sporus, this is no liberation, only a swift, merciless recalibration of terror. He does not vanish quietly as the city teeters. Instead, he is swept up in the emperor's frantic flight. The narratives you follow grow hurried and fragmented. Sporus appears alongside a shrinking band of loyalists as they race from palace to villa, pursued by Roman justice. With every hiding place, Sporus is an unwilling participant in Nero's final humiliation, forced to keep up the charade of conjugal loyalty as the emperor weeps and berates his dwindling retinue. The world outside trembles with opportunity and vengeance. Nero, in these last desperate days, clings to Sporus with a new kind of desperation. In one chilling moment, sources say, the deposed emperor prepares poison for them both, a lover's suicide pact that Sporus reportedly refuses, the refusal carrying a violence of its own. Instead, Nero chooses his own end. He dies by his own hand, with Sporus and a few freedmen as the only mourners. What becomes of Sporus now? In the ancient world, the favorites of a fallen tyrant walk a thin line between asset and liability. Rome is suddenly awash in blood and ambition as rival claimants, Galba, then Otho, then Vitellius, struggle for supremacy. Sporus, stripped of even the small security his forced marriage had provided, is left to navigate a court in chaos. Significant is the fact that Sporus does not immediately disappear. Instead, he is claimed as a valuable novelty, an imperial bauble, proof of Nero's perversions, and paradoxically, his taste for the spectacularly broken. The new emperors each take possession of Sporus in turn. Otho, an ally and rival of Nero for a brief time, keeps Sporus, and even appears to repeat the tragic charade, parading him ostentatiously and calling him wife. It is not affection, but mockery, and possibly a calculated slap at the shades of the old regime. Historians still dispute Otho's motives. Was he compelled by genuine attachment, by sadistic pleasure, or by cynical political theater, daring the old guard to confront Rome's recent ugly past? Herein lies a hidden insight into imperial psychology. In a court governed by fear and opportunism, to possess Sporus is to momentarily wield a fragment of Nero's memory, a relic that both horrifies and fascinates. The abused boy becomes a token, not of love or even lust, but of victory over a dead man's legacy. He is no longer a person. He is evidence, ammunition, a living accusation. Did Sporus hope for anonymity again? Was there a shred of self he could salvage? Psychologically, it is almost unthinkable. The stage lights of court attention never dim. They only shift color from menace to ridicule, from tragic melodrama to farce. Each new master commands a piece of him, and at each turn, Sporus survives by yielding, by vanishing within the role constructed for him. There is debate about whether Sporus had any choice or agency after Nero's death, or if he sought out, in small and cunning ways, the shadows between his new captor's needs. Some suggest he was quietly protected by members of the court, not out of kindness, but as a living reminder of how power distorts everyone in its path. Others argue there could be no safety, only the slow erosion of self by trauma's unrelenting tide. As the violence of Nero's last stand gives way to the chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors, Sporus remains on the stage, unwilling and unwelcome. The institutions that once sustained order now sharpen the tragedy. Rome's machinery of succession, in its hunger for renewal, grinds down not just emperors, but all who are caught in the wake of fallen power. Sporus's ordeal is not over. Its final act, and its final indignity, approaches. The seasons shift, and with them the fortunes of Rome's emperors flicker and die. You watch as Sporus, still a ghost haunting the palaces of the powerful, slides further from memory and deeper into the machinery of others' ambitions. Galba is murdered. Otho falls. Vitellius, ever hungry for spectacle, seizes command. Each transfer of power brushes Sporus into the hands of new owners, each less interested in his survival than in the shadow he casts of the old depraved regime. The court of Vitellius is less a home than a carnival. Here brutality is open, almost celebrated, and Sporus, far from being protected by status, finds himself more vulnerable than ever. One night Vitellius arranges an obscene performance, one last public degradation. The details seep through the centuries. Sporus is to be dressed as a bride once again, but this time not as imperial consort. He will be paraded in front of the Roman populace in a grotesque parody of the marriage rites that once sealed his fate under Nero. The difference now is absolute. No longer is Sporus the sorrowful echo of Poppaea, but a cautionary exhibit, a lesson in what happens to those who are too closely held by monsters. Historians debate the particulars of Sporus's final humiliation. Some speak of a gladiator bridegroom, a public farce so contemptuous that even Rome, city of spectacles, recoils. Was this mock wedding a punishment, a cynical joke on Nero's legacy, or merely Vitellius's way of dazzling the jaded capital, weaponizing Sporus's misery as civic entertainment? The sources disagree on names and motives, but the effect is the same. Sporus is cornered in a world that considers him neither man nor woman, neither innocent nor survivor, but only a symbol of others' appetites. Psychologically, the strain is unspeakable. Years of enforced role-play and public performance have left Sporus brittle, his identity a shroud stitched from other people's fantasies and cruelties. For the first time, ancient chroniclers record Sporus's own choice. Before the ceremonial mock wedding can take place, he removes himself from the stage entirely. Sporus, they say, takes his own life. Whether by poison or dagger, no one knows for certain. There is silence among the servants. Some say he was aided by sympathetic hands. Others say no one dared intervene. Rome continues to swirl around this quiet erasure, one more body lost in a year of chaos and slaughter. Even the manner of Sporus's suicide remains debated. Was he driven there, calculating and clear-eyed, unable to endure one more iteration of public shame? Or was the act a last, desperate grasp at selfhood, a final refusal to be made into a mirror of other men's sickness? The details are lost, the truth trapped in the silence of those who survived only by forgetting. For a moment, Rome pauses. The city has seen slaughter and spectacle, humiliation and rebellion. Yet Sporus's death lingers, a quiet counterpoint to the raucous noise of emperor after emperor clawing for the throne. Among slaves and courtiers alike, a lesson smolders. In the end, even the most powerful victim can be discarded, and the mightiest empire's theater can run on agony alone. But empathy is rare in the streets outside. Sporus's name is muttered, if at all, as a joke, a warning, a half-remembered scandal. The city moves on, as it always does. And yet, for those who watched, who understood the unspeakable price of being noticed in Nero's Rome, a different story haunts the night, a tragedy of survival that ends, finally, with a single terrible choice. Rome settles uneasily into the quiet after the storms, and time passes, covering the scars of Nero's reign and the Year of the Four Emperors. Yet Sporus's story, once a source of scandal and fascination, refuses to be completely forgotten. You walk now through a different Rome, not the palaces, but the whispers of playwrights, the marginalia of later historians, the dreams and nightmares echoed in art and rumor. Sporus is no longer a body in a court, but a figure drifting through the centuries, half empress, half specter, always a question. His life and death ripple through literature and art, recast and reinterpreted for generations. In later antiquity, Poets and satirists wield his name as a symbol, sometimes of shame, other times of suffering endured. Some paintings from the Renaissance onward seize on the grotesque. Sporus as the ultimate victim, Persephone to Nero's Hades, martyr to an emperor's madness. It is in these stories that Sporus's fate is transformed from singular horror to archetype, a shorthand for the cost of unrestrained power and the vulnerability of the voiceless. Historians still debate what Sporus's life ultimately represents. Is he merely the passive shadow of greater men's actions, a human vessel for imperial excess? Or do the tiny, stubborn mysteries of his survival offer hints of agency, resistance, or at least the fierce will to endure? Some recent scholars see in Sporus more than a footnote. He becomes, instead, a window into the lived experience of trauma under autocracy, a figure whose forced roles place the cruelty of Roman society in stark relief. There is, too, the question of Sporus's own feelings, an echo that lingers because it was never clearly recorded. Did he find moments of escape within performance, small victories of self hidden beneath the persona crafted for him? The very uncertainty of his interior world is instructive, laying bare the historical tendency to consume the spectacle of suffering while discarding the reality of the sufferer. Sporus's trauma does not end at his death. It is relived in each retelling, reshaped by every culture that tries to make sense of the unspeakable. Modern debates, too, are drawn to Sporus's legacy. His story, at the intersection of gender, violence, and spectacle, foreshadows the way societies negotiate the memory of marginalized and exploited lives. Some see in Sporus an involuntary martyr for queer history, others a reminder of how language, wife, empress, favorite, can be twisted into a tool for erasure. The competing readings reflect not just on Sporus, but on the anxieties and yearnings of every era that retells his fate. Perhaps the most enduring consequence of Sporus's life is in the uneasy recognition it evokes. The realization that history's victims are often forced into masks, that psychological survival can sometimes mean adopting whatever role ensures the next breath, however cruel the cost. The boy who became Nero's wife, the empress chained not by affection but command, haunts the margins of empire, and perhaps the corners of all societies, still reckoning with the abuse of vulnerable bodies and minds. Yet for all the interpretations, mystery remains. Was there a Sporus beyond the mask, a self-saved, a truth withheld? The records do not say. And so his legacy becomes not closure, but a challenge. To look beyond spectacle and see, if only for a moment, the quiet courage of endurance. Sporus's story pierces through the haze of ancient rumor and modern imagination, disturbing in its details and indeterminate in its lessons. You sense, across millennia, the chill left by his enforced transformation, a testimony to the corrosive power of unchecked authority and the psychological double binds that ensnare the powerless. In every setting where performance becomes survival, where suffering becomes spectacle, Sporus's ghost waits in the wings, reminding us of the thin line between notoriety and oblivion. The psychological implications are profound. The compulsion to mask trauma, the danger of being reduced to symbol, and the question of whether endurance itself can be a form of resistance are as urgent now as they were in Nero's palace. Sporus's tragedy ricochets beyond the ancient world, warning that whenever empathy gives way to spectacle, someone will pay the price in silence and suffering. How we remember Sporus, victim, survivor, cipher, or icon, remains unsettled. Perhaps the legacy of his haunted journey is this stark question. When history's stage demands performance at any cost, who among us would refuse, and at what price?